Awareness always begins before we're ready for it. For Anais Watterson, it begins in a house too small for her mind, surrounded by voices too loud for her thoughts. She is the youngest, yet the oldest, a child born into a world of jokes, tantrums, and noise, carrying a consciousness that doesn't match the shape of her body. Her awareness doesn't arrive gradually. It falls upon her all at once, like light through glass, sharp, clean, merciless. It's not something she learns, it's something she is. From her first words, she's aware of things others refuse to see. The chaos beneath laughter, the futility behind effort, the strange fragility holding her family together. At first, she mistakes this awareness for isolation. She observes, calculates, analyzes, her eyes scanning every movement, every contradiction in her home. Her mother's perfectionism, her father's detachment, her brother's constant noise. All of it seems like data waiting to be decoded. But what she doesn't yet realize is that intelligence and understanding are not the same. She can interpret the world, but she cannot feel it the way they do. Her mind gives her clarity, but it takes away belonging. There's a quiet tragedy in that. Anais never had the luxury of innocence. Childhood, for most, is the time before comprehension. The brief sanctuary where the world feels whole because you don't yet know how easily it breaks. But for Anais, comprehension arrived too early. She understood before she experienced. She saw before she believed. Awareness, in her case, was not awakening. It was exile. Every laugh around her feels a little too loud, every plan too short-sighted, every moment of joy a little too fragile. She begins to realize that awareness isolates because it reveals complexity where others see simplicity. Her brothers can live inside moments. They can chase absurd adventures without needing reasons. But Anais lives in the afterthought. She sees consequences forming even as the fun begins. When Gumball and Darwin dive headfirst into chaos, she calculates its fallout before it even happens. She's too young to carry that kind of foresight, but she carries it anyway. Because that's what intelligence does. It gives you the ability to see patterns, even when you'd rather be surprised. In the origins of her understanding, she tries to find comfort in reason. She surrounds herself with order, books, and structure. Knowledge becomes her form of control, a way to impose meaning on a world that refuses to make sense. Every fact feels like a lifeline, every equation a promise that something in this universe can be predictable. But even logic begins to tremble beneath emotion. She sees her mother, brilliant, powerful, unraveling under the weight of expectation, and realizes that intellect does not protect you from pain. It only helps you describe it more accurately. Awareness becomes burden. She notices how easily her family mistakes noise for purpose. Gumball talks endlessly to avoid silence. Richard eats to fill emptiness. Nicole works to escape stillness, each of them running from something unseen. And Anais, the quiet observer, begins to wonder what she's running from. She has knowledge, control, structure, and yet she feels the same hollowness. Awareness has made her see the problem, but not the cure. She knows why things happen, but not how to live through them. She begins to recognize that intelligence without empathy is sterile. Her logic can fix things, but it cannot heal them. When she tells Gumball the rational solution to a problem, he doesn't hear her, not because she's wrong, but because logic doesn't soothe the heart. Her brilliance feels useless in the face of feeling. That's the first heartbreak of awareness, realizing that truth doesn't comfort anyone. Truth is heavy, and only love can carry it. Over time, Anais starts to see her mind as both tool and cage. It protects her from the absurdity of Elmore, but it also separates her from it. She wants to laugh like her brothers do, without analysing why it's funny. She wants to lose control, to forget logic, to feel something messy and meaningless. But even her attempts at chaos are calculated. She's trapped in her own clarity, aware of her own awareness, unable to turn it off. That's what makes her oldest among them all. She doesn't get to be surprised anymore. She can only observe what others haven't realised yet. Awareness also brings compassion, though she doesn't recognise it at first. She sees the weaknesses in her family, not with judgment, but with understanding. Her mother's perfectionism is fear. Her father's passivity is pain. Her brother's chaos is their way of avoiding the stillness she drowns in daily. Awareness gives her X-ray vision into hearts that don't know they're breaking. She could use this insight to detach, to rise above, but she doesn't. She stays. She endures their noise, their mistakes, their denial, not because she has to, but because love, even when unacknowledged, is the only antidote to awareness. Her solitude deepens as she grows. The more she understands, the less she can explain. Intelligence isolates because language cannot translate feeling. When she tries to share her perspective, she's met with laughter or confusion. Her truth becomes invisible. She starts to realize that being understood is not the same as being loved, and that sometimes love is what happens when people care for you despite not understanding you at all. That realization softens her. For the first time, awareness begins to turn into wisdom. Wisdom, unlike intelligence, accepts contradiction. It knows that the world can be absurd and meaningful at the same time. It knows that people can be flawed and still worth loving. It knows that laughter and despair can share the same breath. Anais begins to live between these opposites. She stops trying to fix the world and starts listening to it. Her awareness becomes less of a weapon and more of a lens, not to control life, but to witness it. She notices how knowledge itself changes depending on how it's used. When she uses it to separate herself, it becomes pride. When she uses it to connect, it becomes empathy. Awareness isn't about seeing more, it's about seeing gently. Her brilliance, when filtered through compassion, becomes something luminous, not cold light, but warmth. There's a quiet moment, one the series doesn't dwell on, but it lingers, when Anais looks at her family simply existing around her. Gumball shouting about nothing, Richard laughing with food in his mouth, Nicole buried in exhaustion. And for the first time, she doesn't analyse any of it, she just watches. The noise, the imperfection, the mess, it all feels beautiful. Awareness stops hurting when you stop demanding purity from the world. In that stillness, she understands what intelligence alone could never reveal. That meaning is not found in perfection, but in participation. You can't think your way into belonging. You have to feel your way there. And sometimes that means stepping into the absurd without needing it to make sense. Anais doesn't lose her intelligence, she learns to use it differently. Her thoughts no longer hover above the world, they sink into it. She stops dissecting and starts dwelling. Awareness, once her exile, becomes her connection. She doesn't have to leave her family to transcend them. She transcends by staying, by learning to see the love hidden in their foolishness, the sincerity buried beneath their chaos. That's what makes her extraordinary. Most who see too much retreat from life. Anais, despite her brilliance, chooses to live inside it. She doesn't lower her awareness, she raises her compassion. Her mind remains sharp, but her heart learns to round its edges. Awareness transforms from loneliness into tenderness. And in the quiet before, sleep, When her family's voices fade into the hum of the night, Anais lies awake, eyes open to the ceiling, feeling the full weight of her mind and the world pressing softly against her chest. She's still the smallest in the house, but her thoughts stretch further than the walls, reaching for something infinite. Not answers, not perfection, just understanding. And for once, she doesn't need to think her way there. She just feels it. Awareness, in its truest form, is not clarity. It's acceptance. The moment when the world stops needing to make sense because it finally feels alive enough as it is. Knowledge, for Anais Watterson, was never a pursuit. It was an instinct. She didn't choose to understand. Understanding simply happened to her, uninvited and irreversible. From the moment her mind began to form patterns, the world stopped being magic and became mechanism. Every mystery turned into an equation. Every question found a structure. She could see through illusions before she ever learned to enjoy them. And that, she would come to realize, is the quiet tragedy of brilliance. When you know too much too soon, the world loses its softness. She was surrounded by people who thrived on not knowing. Gumball lived through confusion, Richard through carelessness, Nicole through denial. Even Darwin, kind as he was, lived by instinct rather than analysis. Anais had no such refuge. Her mind was a lens that could never close. It saw through excuses, saw beneath laughter, saw the fractures in every family ritual they performed to hold themselves together. The knowledge she carried was not beautiful. It was heavy, too heavy for a child. At first, she wore it like armor. Her intelligence made her useful, made her necessary. When chaos erupted, she could restore order. When her family faltered, she could explain, plan, fix. For a while, that gave her identity. If she couldn't belong as a child, she could belong as a savior. But the price of knowing is that you stop being held. Everyone comes to you for solutions, but no one comes to understand you. Anais became the still point in a spinning world, everyone orbiting her mind, no one touching her heart. That loneliness was quiet, but constant. It grew in the spaces between her accomplishments. Every success felt hollow because no one could share it. You can't celebrate understanding with people who need things to remain mysterious. When she spoke, her family laughed, not unkindly, but unknowingly. They mistook her insight for attitude, her sadness for sarcasm. The smarter she became, the less she was heard. She started to notice something about knowledge, that it doesn't just separate you from others, it separates you from yourself. The more she knew, the harder it became to feel. Her emotions began to shrink behind analysis. Sadness became a natural response to circumstance. Joy became an expected hormonal reaction. She could define every feeling, but couldn't inhabit any. The mind that could explain everything made her heart a stranger, and yet she envied her family's ignorance. The way Gumball could turn disaster into play, the way Richard could mistake comfort for happiness, the way Nicole's anger was pure, unfiltered, real to theirs. Their simplicity was messy but alive. They didn't think their way through life, they lived it. Anais couldn't stop thinking long enough to live. Awareness had made her a spectator of her own existence. She began to experiment with letting go. She tried to act impulsively, to play recklessly with her brothers, to laugh without knowing why. But even in her rebellion, calculation lingered. Every outburst felt like theatre, every joy like a simulation. It wasn't that she lacked emotion, it was that she observed it while feeling it. She was both the scientist and the experiment, forever split between participation and analysis. The more she saw, the more she realized that knowledge doesn't protect you from pain. It only names it. Knowing why you're lonely doesn't make you less lonely. Understanding love doesn't make it easier to receive. Insight doesn't dissolve fear. It only gives it structure. The human heart, she began to understand, doesn't need explanation. It needs company. And intelligence, by its nature, moves faster than company can follow. There were moments, rare but luminous, when her knowledge and her feeling aligned. Moments when her awareness didn't isolate her, but illuminated everything. She'd watch her mother working late into the night and suddenly understand the tenderness hidden in exhaustion. She'd watch Gumball and Darwin fail spectacularly at something and feel a strange pride in their persistence. She realized that foolishness, in its own way, was courage, the courage to live without understanding. That realization humbled her. For the first time, she questioned whether knowledge was truly superior to naivety. Maybe ignorance wasn't absence. Maybe it was grace. The ability to live without dissecting every moment might be its own form of wisdom. There's peace in not knowing, peace that intellect can never fully reclaim. But knowledge, once gained, cannot be forgotten. It doesn't let you go. The more she tried to step backward into innocence, the more her awareness followed her like a shadow. Even in dreams, her mind refused to rest. It calculated patterns in the randomness of her imagination, found symmetry in nonsense. Sleep became a form of study. Even her subconscious couldn't stop thinking. That's the cruelest part of knowing it doesn't end when you want it to. So she turned inward. If she couldn't escape her mind, she could try to understand it. She began to question the structure of her own intelligence, who it served, what it protected, what it feared. She noticed that much of her learning came not from curiosity, but from anxiety. Knowledge gave her the illusion of control. As long as she understood something, it couldn't surprise her. And as long as it couldn't surprise her, it couldn't hurt her. Her intellect, she realized, was a defense mechanism disguised as virtue. This insight broke her heart a little. She wasn't a genius because she loved truth. She was a genius because she was afraid of uncertainty. Her intelligence wasn't freedom, it was armor. And the price of that armor was spontaneity. She had protected herself so well that she no longer knew how to be unguarded. Awareness became both her shield and her solitude. She began to see parallels in her family. Nicole's perfectionism, Richard's avoidance, Gumball's humor, all different ways of escaping the same fear. Everyone, she realized, builds a fortress around their pain. Hers just happened to be made of ideas. But insight is not despair. It's the beginning of compassion. As she recognized her own defenses, she stopped resenting theirs. Awareness softened into empathy again. She stopped trying to fix her family and started simply being with them. She realized that love doesn't need solutions, it just needs presence. And sometimes, the most intelligent thing you can do is to stop explaining and start listening. Knowledge had given her distance, but it also gave her the power to see the larger pattern, the way all beings, no matter how foolish or wise, circle around the same needs: belonging, safety, love. In that recognition, she found a new kind of peace. Not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of acceptance. The understanding that understanding is not enough, and that's okay. Late one night, she sits in her room surrounded by books. They are her comfort and her cage. She runs her fingers across the pages, realizing that every book, no matter how brilliant, ends. Knowledge always leads to silence. There's no final truth waiting at the end of all her thinking, just quiet. And maybe that quiet isn't emptiness. Maybe it's rest. Anais closes the book, leans back, and listens to the distant chaos of her family downstairs. The sound, once distracting, now feels like a heartbeat. It's imperfect, unpredictable, alive. She smiles faintly. Maybe she doesn't need to understand everything to feel connected to it. Maybe the price of knowing is not loneliness. Maybe it's the privilege of learning how to love the world anyway. Awareness, she realizes, is not the end of wonder. It's the beginning of gentleness. The moment when the mind stops dissecting life and starts holding it carefully, knowing it can't be contained. Loneliness doesn't come to Anais through absence. It comes through presence, through the sound of laughter that she can't quite enter, through conversations that end before she can say what she means. It's the kind of loneliness that only grows in crowded rooms, when you're surrounded by love that doesn't know how to reach you. For Anais, the world is full of people who care about her deeply, yet none of them speak her language. Their affection feels like music from behind glass, beautiful, audible, but distant. Intelligence, she has learned, doesn't make you separate because you're superior. It makes you separate because you see too much. It turns the simple into the complex, the warm into the fragile, the joyful into the temporary. It shows her not only what is, but what will eventually end. Every moment she shares with her family glows a little brighter and fades a little faster in her mind, because she sees its impermanence even as it unfolds. That's the curse. Awareness. You live the ending of things even while they're still happening. When she was younger, she thought loneliness was caused by the foolishness of others, by their inability to understand her. But now she sees that her own clarity contributes to the gap. Understanding too deeply builds walls as easily as ignorance does. Each observation she makes about others becomes a layer of distance. She can explain everyone's behavior, but that doesn't make her closer to them. In fact, it does the opposite. Knowledge becomes a kind of veil, transparent, yet impossible to pass through. At dinner, she listens to her family argue about something trivial. She could stop it easily. She could explain the misunderstanding, dismantle the logic, guide them toward peace. But she doesn't. She lets the noise unfold, watching how emotion moves between them like electricity, irrational, messy, human. And for a moment, she feels like she's outside of time, observing life rather than living it. The table feels like a theatre stage, and she's the audience. This is the loneliness of intelligence, not the absence of connection, but the constant awareness that connection is fragile, built on contradictions that can't be solved. She loves her family, but their love exists in a realm beyond comprehension. It's impulsive, sometimes absurd, sometimes painful, and yet it sustains her. She begins to see that what she calls loneliness might actually be the space where love breathes. Still, that doesn't make it easier. There are nights when she sits alone in her room while the rest of the house vibrates with laughter. She hears Gumball shouting, Darwin's giggles, Richard's joyful nonsense, Nicole's voice softening with fatigue, a chaos of affection that doesn't need understanding to exist. And Anais feels like a planet in the same orbit but on a different frequency. The warmth reaches her, but the meaning doesn't. She envies them, not for their simplicity, but for their ease. They move through life like swimmers, while she's stuck studying the water. In the gift, or in any moment where she tries to express affection through logic, she learns again how emotion resists structure. She'll plan the perfect gesture, the perfect words, the perfect solution, but the response she gets never matches what she expects. Love, she realizes, doesn't reward precision. It rewards presence. No amount of knowledge can replace a moment of shared laughter, no matter how senseless it is. That realization breaks her heart and heals it at once. Because it means intelligence was never meant to dominate emotion, only to understand it. The mind's purpose is not to lead the heart, but to make room for it. Anais begins to understand that loneliness isn't an error. It's a signal, the space between perception and participation, asking her to close the distance, not through logic, but through surrender. She starts to experiment with surrender, not by becoming less intelligent, but by allowing emotion to lead without resistance. When Gumball drags her into chaos, she no longer resists the irrationality. She lets herself get caught in the current, laughing even when she doesn't fully understand why. She realizes that laughter doesn't need reason. It's a form of belonging, an ancient signal that says, "I'm here with you, even in the nonsense." And in those moments, the loneliness fades. Not completely, it never disappears entirely, but it softens, becoming something tender rather than sharp. She discovers that loneliness itself can be beautiful when you stop trying to escape it. It's the proof that you're separate enough to see, yet connected enough to care. To be lonely is to stand on the bridge between self and others, to see both sides clearly. That vision hurts, but it's also what allows her to love more deeply. Anais begins to find companionship in observation. Watching becomes its own form of intimacy. She notices the small kindnesses others miss. Darwin's subtle patience when Gumball loses control. Nicole's brief glances of guilt after anger. Richard's strange flashes of insight hidden beneath silliness. Each observation becomes a thread of connection. The more she sees, the less she judges. Awareness transforms from distance into devotion. Still, there's a deeper layer to her solitude, one she rarely admits even to herself. Beneath the intelligence, beneath the poise, she carries a quiet fear that if she ever stops being brilliant, she will stop being loved. Her worth, she suspects, is conditional, tied to her usefulness, her clarity, her calm. When others depend on her wisdom, she feels valued. When they laugh without her, she feels invisible. The loneliness of intelligence is not only separation, it's the belief that love must be earned through understanding. But over time, she starts to see the flaw in that thought. Her family doesn't love her because she's smart. They love her because she's herself. Even when they don't understand her, they reach for her. Even when they frustrate her, she reaches back. Love doesn't need equal intelligence. It needs equal willingness. There's a quiet evening when she sits with her family watching television. The show is ridiculous, plotless, noisy, absurd. Gumball laughs until he cries. Darwin hiccups through his giggles. Richard claps his hands at random moments. Nicole sighs but stays. Anais sits between them, not laughing, but smiling. For the first time, she realizes that understanding the joke isn't necessary to feel the joy in the room. She feels connected, not through intellect, but through presence. That's the secret the loneliness of intelligence hides. The bridge back to belonging is built not from thought, but from surrender. To love is to step into what you can't explain. To belong is to stop standing above the world and let it move through you. As the night fades, she feels her own thoughts quiet. The hum of understanding softens into silence. The distance between her and the world shrinks until it feels like breathing. Loneliness, she realizes, isn't the absence of love. It's love that hasn't yet found its shape. And for the first time in a long while, she lets herself stop thinking. She leans into the noise, lets it wash over her, and closes her eyes. Intelligence has carried her far, but here, in the unthinking warmth of her family's chaos, she finds something knowledge could never give her: peace. peace without reason. Control begins as comfort. For Anais Watterson, it's the thread she weaves through the chaos, the one certainty in a house where meaning constantly dissolves into laughter, shouting, and noise. The Wattersons live like a storm, unpredictable, relentless, beautiful, and Anais, small and sharp, tries to be the eye within it. She doesn't seek control for power, she seeks it for peace. Control, to her, feels like safety, the illusion that understanding can keep the world from breaking. She learns early that chaos answers to no one. Gumbel's impulsiveness, Richard's simplicity, Nicole's volatility, all of it swirls around her without pattern. So she builds structure. She arranges her world into equations, rituals, logic. If she can predict outcomes, she can prevent pain. If she can see far enough ahead, she can keep everyone from falling apart. That's what awareness taught her. That foresight feels like love when you're afraid of losing what you care for. But control is never as kind as it pretends to be. It starts as order and ends as anxiety. The more she organizes, the more she realizes how fragile her hold on anything truly is. Her family's chaos doesn't bow to her intelligence. It adapts, it multiplies. For every problem she solves, 2 more appear. And still, she tries, because letting go feels like failure. There's a moment, maybe one that happens 100 times, where she watches her plans unravel in front of her. A carefully calculated solution derailed by a single unpredictable choice. Gumbel forgets, Richard misunderstands, Nicole pushes too far. Every variable she didn't account for reminds her of the one truth she can't control. Life doesn't follow logic. At first, she resists this truth. She doubles down on calculation, on preparation. Her mind becomes a fortress of plans, but the walls of that fortress are built from fear. Fear that without control, everything she loves will collapse. Control is her way of protecting the world from its own unpredictability, and herself from the ache of helplessness. She doesn't realize that the two are the same thing. Her intelligence, once a tool for understanding, becomes a weapon against uncertainty. She uses it to anticipate, to manipulate outcomes before they happen. But the more she tries to contain life, the smaller life becomes. Control, she discovers, has a cost. It shrinks possibility. It removes surprise, and with it, wonder. The very chaos she's trying to tame is the same force that makes the world alive. Anais begins to see this in moments of contradiction. She'll watch her family stumble through disaster and still manage to find laughter in the ruins. She'll see how Gumbel turns mistakes into adventures, how Darwin forgives without hesitation, how Nicole's temper hides a heart too full of love to contain. Their chaos, frustrating as it is, keeps them connected. Her order, however pure, isolates her. There's an evening where she sits in the living room surrounded by the aftermath of one of Gumbel's catastrophes. Papers scattered, objects broken, noise echoing down the hall. She wants to clean it, to fix it, to restore balance. But something stops her. For once, she just sits in the mess. She breathes in the disarray, lets her eyes wander across the imperfection, and feels something strange, calm. The mess is ugly, but it's alive. It exists without her control, and that makes it real. She realizes slowly that control is not the same as care. Care allows freedom. Control demands containment. She loves her family, but her love sometimes comes with conditions: behave, listen, follow reason. Their love for her, though messy, asks nothing. It exists even when she's wrong. Maybe that's what unconditional love truly means. The courage to stop managing the world and start trusting it. Her need for control begins to soften. She starts letting small things happen without interference. A failed experiment, a forgotten rule, a broken toy. She watches chaos bloom and fade, realizing that destruction doesn't always mean disaster. Sometimes it's transformation. Things fall apart to make space for what's next, and in that space, she feels something she hasn't in a long time: relief. The weight of responsibility lifts, even just for a moment. She doesn't have to predict everything. She doesn't have to hold the world together with her mind. It can hold itself. It always has. There's a deep truth she begins to feel rather than think. Control is the shadow of fear, not the light of understanding. It gives the illusion of safety by isolating you from the unpredictable pulse of life. To control everything is to live behind glass. You can see beauty, but you can't touch it. You can analyze joy, but you can't feel it. The price of control is contact. Anais starts to watch how the world moves when she doesn't interfere. She notices that balance often restores itself without her guidance. Arguments end, laughter returns, time softens sharp edges. The universe, she realizes, doesn't need her to supervise it. It simply asks her to participate. This realization doesn't erase her intellect, it refines it. Her brilliance becomes quieter, less about predicting outcomes and more about perceiving patterns. She learns that wisdom isn't control, it's observation without possession. The world isn't a puzzle to solve, but a rhythm to join. The illusion of control begins to fade when she stops fighting imperfection. She notices that the very things she once tried to correct, mistakes, detours, accidents, are the moments where meaning happens. The laughter that follows a failure, the forgiveness that follows anger, the beauty that follows loss. Without error, there is no growth. Without chaos, there is no creation. In one quiet scene, she sits by the window as rain falls unevenly against the glass. Drops slide in unpredictable paths, merging and separating. She tries to trace one with her finger, but loses it halfway down. The water finds its own route. That's how life works, she thinks. It doesn't need straight lines to reach where it's going. Control isn't peace, it's resistance to peace. True peace is trust, the willingness to let things happen and meet them as they are. When Anais finally begins to trust, she discovers a gentler kind of power, presence. The ability to remain centered, not by holding the world still, but by moving with it. By the end of that night, she realizes that her family, in all their absurdity, have been teaching her this lesson all along. Their chaos wasn't ignorance. It was acceptance, the instinct to live fully, even when life refuses to be neat. They don't avoid mistakes, they embody them, and in doing so, they remind her that existence itself is messy, and that messiness is sacred. So she lets go. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in quiet increments. A deep breath instead of correction. A laugh instead of a lecture. A pause before fixing what might not need fixing at all. The world doesn't collapse, it unfolds. When she finally closes her eyes that night, her thoughts don't race, they drift. Control releases its grip, and in its place, there's peace. The peace that comes when you stop trying to own the rhythm of life and start dancing to it. She understands now that control was never the point of intelligence. Understanding was. And understanding at its deepest level means accepting that some things can only be loved, not solved. Awareness, for Anais Watterson, has always been a double-edged gift. It gives her clarity, but it never lets her rest. The more she sees, the less she can ignore. Every sound, every glance, every small fracture in her world becomes visible to her mind, like cracks spreading beneath glass. Awareness sharpens perception, but it also magnifies weight. There's no pause between observation and comprehension. Every truth arrives, fully formed, unfiltered, heavy. She notices things no one else does. The exhaustion in her mother's sighs. The flicker of disappointment in her father's eyes when he pretends he's fine. The way Gumball laughs too loudly when he's afraid. Or how Darwin goes quiet when guilt seeps into him. None of these moments are dramatic, but they accumulate. Awareness, she realizes, doesn't wound in bursts. It erodes, gently, constantly. The more she understands, the more she feels the sorrow that lives inside every ordinary moment. Most of the time, she hides it. She speaks in facts, in logic, in calm precision. People hear her words and think she's unbothered, but inside, the weight builds. It's not sadness in the traditional sense. It's saturation. Her heart fills with what everyone else leaves unspoken. She carries not only her own thoughts, but the emotional debris of everyone she loves. Awareness turns her into a vessel that fills faster than it can empty. At first, she tries to manage it. She translates emotion into analysis, turning pain into puzzles she can solve. If her mother's stress is a formula, she can balance it. If Gumball's impulsiveness is a variable, she can adjust it. But the deeper she goes, the more she realizes that human beings aren't equations. Emotion refuses containment. It leaks through logic, seeping into places she can't reach. Every attempt to fix the world ends with her realizing that some things must simply be felt. There's a quiet kind of fatigue that comes from always being aware. It's the exhaustion of seeing everything and not being able to look away. The burden of awareness is not the presence of pain, but the impossibility of ignorance. She sometimes watches her family act thoughtlessly, blissfully unaware, and envies them. Ignorance, she thinks, isn't stupidity, it's mercy. It's the space between perception and paralysis, the room to breathe between knowing and feeling. But she can't unsee what she knows. Once consciousness opens, it doesn't close again. Awareness demands endurance. It asks you to live in a world without illusions and still find reasons to love it. She begins to recognize how loneliness and awareness are intertwined. Awareness isolates because it reveals what others can't yet bear to face. When she points out truth, it unsettles people. When she stays silent, the truth unsettles her. There's no escape, only balance, learning when to speak and when to hold compassion quietly. She starts to see that being aware doesn't mean announcing everything you see. Sometimes, wisdom means carrying the truth gently, without forcing it into the light. Her family teaches her this in their own way. Gumball's absurdity, Richard's simplicity, Nicole's persistence, all forms of survival through selective blindness. They don't need to see everything to live fully. They trust in small, incomplete truths, and those truths are enough. Anais envies their ability to rest inside uncertainty. Her awareness, though deeper, feels restless, always searching for resolution that never comes. There's a moment when she catches herself observing rather than feeling again. Her family is laughing in the other room, and she watches from the doorway, detached but smiling. They seem so unaware of how fleeting it all is, how laughter fades, how time thins out joy. She wonders whether they'd laugh as freely if they knew what she knows. Then, for the first time, she stops thinking about the answer. She walks into the room and, lets herself join them. Awareness will always whisper its truths, but she doesn't have to listen to it all the time. Later that night, she sits awake, the world dim and still. Her thoughts drift toward the infinite loops of life, people growing, breaking, healing, forgetting, starting again. Awareness lets her see the cycles clearly, but not control them. The futility of trying to hold on to anything begins to make sense. Awareness isn't about control or mastery, it's about humility. To see deeply is to know how little power you have over anything but your own heart. She begins to feel compassion, not only for others, but for herself. She realizes that awareness without kindness becomes cruelty. The mind that sees everything must also learn how to forgive what it sees. Forgive the chaos. Forgive the absurdity. Forgive the endlessness of imperfection. Awareness without forgiveness becomes despair. With forgiveness, it becomes understanding. She remembers a moment from childhood when she broke one of her toys, something small, something meaningless, and her first instinct wasn't sadness, but analysis. She studied the break, the point of failure, the structure. But later, when she found herself holding the pieces, something changed. She realized that the act of fixing wasn't the same as the act of caring. Awareness gives you the blueprint. Love gives you the reason. As she grows into her awareness, she learns to carry it more softly. She stops trying to resist its weight and instead learns how to balance it. Awareness will always make life heavier, but weight can ground you as much as it can burden you. It can pull you closer to what's real. She starts to understand that her awareness isn't meant to protect her from pain, but to help her witness it fully. Pain isn't punishment. It's proof that life touches you. To feel deeply, even when it hurts, is to honor existence. Awareness, then, is not just seeing, it's participating in the truth of being alive. In the quiet before sleep, she looks at her reflection and sees not a prodigy or a child genius, but someone learning to hold contradiction, someone who can know and still hope, who can see the truth and still love the illusion, who can feel the ache of existence and still smile at its beauty. That's the burden and the blessing of awareness. Because awareness, she realizes, isn't meant to make life easier, it's meant to make it real. And reality, no matter how heavy, is worth carrying. When she finally lies down, the thoughts don't stop, but they slow. Awareness doesn't fade, it settles. The world hums quietly around her, imperfect and complete. And for the first time, she feels that maybe the weight she's been carrying isn't crushing her. Maybe it's anchoring her, keeping her close to the ground, to life, to everything that matters. Innocence is something Anais has always known from the outside, like sunlight seen through a window. She understands it perfectly, but she cannot touch it. It belongs to her brothers, to the world they move through without hesitation, without analysis. For them, the present moment is endless. For her, it's fleeting. Innocence lives in the spaces between questions, and Anais has never been able to stop asking them. She watches Gumball and Darwin run through the streets of Elmore, their laughter unrestrained, their ideas unfiltered, their sense of consequence non-existent. To them, life is a series of possibilities. To her, it's a system of outcomes. They don't fear what they don't know. They celebrate it. And sometimes she envies that, the freedom that comes with not needing the world to make sense. When she was younger, she thought innocence was ignorance, a failure to see. But as she grows, she starts to see that innocence isn't blindness, it's courage. The courage to experience life without needing to protect yourself from it. Innocence is the ability to trust the world even after it's proven untrustworthy. It's not the absence of awareness, but the refusal to let awareness harden you. That realization unsettles her. Because if innocence is courage, then perhaps her own intelligence, her instinct to analyze and prepare, isn't strength but fear. She begins to see that her awareness, as powerful as it is, has always come with distance. The more she knows, the less she risks. The less she risks, the less she feels. She has built her life like a fortress of understanding, and now she stands at the top of its walls, looking down at her brothers playing in the chaos below. They look foolish, but they also look free. She tries, sometimes, to join them, to fall into their rhythm, to surrender to nonsense. But her mind doesn't move that way. It keeps interpreting, predicting, judging. Every laugh she gives feels calculated. Every mistake feels deliberate. She wants to lose herself, but can't stop being aware of losing herself. Innocence, she realizes, can't be recreated through effort. The moment you try to be innocent, you aren't. It's the one state of being that disappears the instant you reach for it. And yet, she finds herself drawn to it. She watches her brothers destroy something and somehow make beauty from the pieces. They break rules, but their hearts remain whole. They fail constantly, yet their faith in life never falters. To them, failure isn't evidence of limitation. It's proof of participation. They don't think in terms of success or purpose. They think in terms of movement. That's what innocence does. It keeps life in motion. Anais, in contrast, is always stopping time in her head. She pauses, rewinds, analyzes, rewrites. She experiences life in retrospect. Innocence, though, only lives in immediacy. It can't survive reflection. She wonders if maybe that's why she admires her brothers so much, not because they're right, but because they don't need to be. Their mistakes don't haunt them because they never stop to catalogue them. They live unburdened by memory, while she carries every lesson she's ever learned like a stone in her pocket. There's a quiet afternoon when she finds them building something nonsensical, a tower of random junk stacked without purpose or plan. They argue about its meaning, laugh, start over, fail again, and keep going. Anais watches for a long time before finally asking what they're doing. Gumball shrugs and says, "We're just seeing how high it goes. No metaphor, no deeper point, just play." For a moment, she feels something like awe. The phrase echoes in her mind. Just seeing how high it goes. That, she realizes, might be the purest expression of existence. Not everything needs an end, a meaning, or a moral. Some things simply are. Innocence doesn't need justification. It's enough on its own. As the tower collapses and laughter fills the air, Anais feels a strange warmth. It's not ignorance she's witnessing. It's freedom from the need to be right. Her brother's innocence is not a lack of knowledge. It's the ability to live with incomplete knowledge and still find joy. Maybe that's the secret she's been missing. Awareness teaches you what's fragile, but innocence teaches you to love it anyway. That night, she thinks about what it means to lose innocence. Maybe you don't lose it all at once. Maybe it fades with every time you choose understanding over wonder, every time you protect yourself instead of trusting the world. But if that's true, maybe you can regain it too, not the same innocence of childhood, but a wiser one, a conscious innocence, the ability to look at the world's absurdity with open eyes and still laugh. She begins to see that innocence isn't something you're born with. It's something you return to after awareness breaks you open. It's what happens when you've seen everything fall apart and still choose to believe that life is worth living. Innocence, in its mature form, is faith without evidence. It's love without logic. Anais starts to practice this quietly. When her brothers propose an impossible plan, she doesn't immediately point out the flaws. When her parents make mistakes, she doesn't correct them. When the world feels absurd, she lets it. She stops needing every answer to align. She allows wonder to coexist with wisdom. For the first time, awareness doesn't suffocate her, it supports her. She starts to feel the same joy her brothers feel, not because she's forgotten the truth, but because she's learned to hold it gently. There's a moment before bed when she looks at the night sky and imagines the stars as questions, endless and bright. Her old self would have tried to name them, categorize them, understand their distances. Now she just looks. The not knowing feels warm. Maybe this is what innocence feels like after you've lost it. The peace of finally realizing you don't need to know everything to feel connected to it. Her brothers, asleep in the next room, murmur and laugh in their dreams. The sound reaches her through the wall like a reminder. The world, in all its noise, still hums with something pure. Innocence, she thinks, isn't the absence of awareness. It's awareness without bitterness. It's seeing clearly and still choosing wonder. For the first time in her life, she doesn't feel smaller than her understanding. She feels held by it, not as a boundary, but as a circle. The mirror of innocence reflects not what she's lost, but what she can become. Someone who knows everything is temporary and still loves it fiercely. And as her eyes close, she whispers to the dark in her mind, I don't need to understand it all to be part of it. That's enough. Love, to Anais Watterson, begins as a problem to solve. It's the one force that refuses her logic, the one equation that breaks the rules every time she tries to balance it. She can explain gravity, energy, motion, but love doesn't follow patterns. It appears without reason, survives contradiction, defies prediction. It doesn't behave like a formula. It behaves like weather, unpredictable, sometimes devastating, always alive. At first, she approaches it as she does everything else, through comprehension. She tries to define what it is, what it does, why it exists. Her mother's love is discipline disguised as duty. Her father's love is simplicity disguised as trust. Gumball and Darwin's love is chaos disguised as faith. And hers, she isn't sure yet. She feels it constantly, but it doesn't fit any model she can measure. It doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like pressure. Sometimes it feels like pain. Sometimes, when she's alone, it feels like silence. She begins to notice that love, in its truest form, is not a constant. It shifts shape depending on where it's found. It can be as loud as her family's laughter, or as quiet as a moment of shared exhaustion. Love lives in contradiction, both chaos and calm, both selfishness and sacrifice. It can wound and heal in the same breath. Understanding this doesn't make it easier to feel. It only deepens the mystery. But for the first time, Anais doesn't run from the mystery. She lets it surround her. She watches how love moves through her family, how it changes form to meet their flaws. Nicole's love is fierce, structured, born from fear of failure. Richard's love is unguarded, clumsy, but pure. Gumball's love is impulsive, intense, fleeting, endlessly renewed. Darwin's love is patient and forgiving, so vast it almost erases itself. And Anais, the observer, sees that love isn't singular. It doesn't belong to any one definition. It's the rhythm that keeps chaos from collapsing into emptiness. For so long, she thought her intelligence set her apart from the others. Now, she sees that love is the great equalizer. It levels everything. You can't outthink love. You can only meet it. It humbles her in ways logic never could. There's no control here, no equation to fix or finish. Love doesn't want solving, it wants surrender. She remembers the times she tried to control it, the moments she corrected her family's mistakes, not out of care, but out of fear that love wasn't enough to hold them together. But love doesn't need management. It needs faith. The kind of faith that acts without proof, that endures without clarity. The kind of faith her brothers seem to live by without even realizing it. Anais begins to see love as the thread running through every contradiction she's ever wrestled with. Awareness gave her clarity. Control gave her safety. Innocence gave her wonder. But love gives her purpose. It's what connects all those fragments into something whole. She starts to feel that maybe love is what awareness was always leading her toward, a way of knowing that doesn't need to separate to understand. In the small moments, she starts to recognize its presence. When her mother's exhaustion softens into a smile after hearing her children laugh, that's love. When Richard forgets everything except to say, "I love you," that's love too. When Gumball and Darwin argue fiercely, only to forget why 5 minutes later, love again, disguised as foolishness. She realizes that love is not perfection, it's persistence. The decision to stay, to return, to keep feeling even when it hurts. She starts to see that her own love has always been quiet, less like a flame and more like gravity. It doesn't announce itself, it holds. It's the kind of love that watches over, steadies, and forgives silently. Her family may not always see it, but that doesn't make it less real. Love doesn't need recognition to exist. It exists because it must. There's a scene in her life, simple, but it stays with her. The house is a mess. Dinner is chaos. Everyone's talking over everyone else. The air is heavy with noise and warmth. Anais looks around the table and suddenly feels her awareness soften. She doesn't see individuals to analyze anymore. She sees a system of affection too complex to define and too beautiful to dissect. This, she realizes, is love's shape, not linear, not logical, but fluid. It expands to fill whatever space you give it. And when she looks closer, she notices something more profound. Love is not something that happens between people. It's something that is people. It's the shared field they move through, the unseen energy that binds them even when they fight, even when they drift. Love is the continuity beneath contradiction. Awareness made her see difference. Love makes her see connection. She starts to understand that love is not the opposite of logic. It's its completion. Where logic ends, love begins. The mind can describe the world, but only love allows you to belong to it. Without love, awareness turns into alienation. With love, awareness turns into awe. That's what she feels now, awe. Not for perfection, but for existence itself. Her younger self might have dismissed this as sentimental, but she knows better now. Sentimentality is not weakness, it's recognition. It's the moment you stop demanding that life prove itself to you and start being grateful that it exists at all. She understands now that love doesn't need to be flawless to be infinite. Later that night, she sits in her room as the house quiets. The air hums faintly, the residue of laughter, the echoes of living. She thinks about how love has shaped everything, even her solitude. Love doesn't always appear as warmth. Sometimes it's the ache of missing, the silence after laughter, the feeling of wishing you could explain something to someone and realizing you don't need to. For Anais, love has taken many shapes: guidance, patience, forgiveness, absence, but the one she feels most deeply now is acceptance. Love, she realizes, is the art of letting everything be as it is. The moment you stop trying to make people what you want and start cherishing them for what they already are, that's where love becomes complete. She closes her eyes and lets herself feel the world without analysis. The noise, the imperfection, the fleetingness, all of it, beautiful. And in that moment she knows, love doesn't need to last forever to be real. It doesn't need to make sense to matter. Love's shape is constant transformation, and maybe that's why it never breaks. As she drifts towards sleep, Anais feels the boundaries of thought dissolve. Awareness, innocence, and understanding all fold into one quiet truth. Love is not an idea to hold. It's the silence you fall into when words finally end. Perception is Anais Watterson's most natural state, the quiet scanning of everything, the awareness that never dims. Even when her body rests, her mind remains awake, parsing, measuring, recognizing. It is not something she does, it is something she is. And though it's what makes her extraordinary, it's also what keeps her from peace. Because the world, when seen too clearly, becomes unbearably complex. As a child, she thought perception was power. To see was to understand. To understand was to master. But mastery never came. The more she saw, the less she could hold. Awareness didn't bring control, it brought contradiction. The world refused to stay still long enough to make sense. Everything shifted as soon as she thought she grasped it. What she once called clarity began to feel like distortion, truth breaking apart under the pressure of her attention. She begins to see how perception, like light, can blind as easily as it reveals. You can't look directly at everything forever. The eye grows tired, the heart even more so. She realizes that perception without pause becomes noise, a flood of information with no space for feeling. She understands now why her brothers can live so freely. Their vision narrows. They see only what matters in the moment. They don't notice every fracture in the world, and that's precisely why they can laugh. Anais can't unsee what she sees. She notices the sadness that hides beneath kindness, the insecurity that hides beneath arrogance, the loneliness tucked between every act of love. She perceives nuance everywhere, and in doing so, loses the comfort of simplicity. Perception, for her, has become heavy, not because the world is cruel, but because it is endlessly layered. One afternoon, she sits in the schoolyard watching other kids play. Their joy is effortless, loud, chaotic. She doesn't join them. She studies the way they move, the dynamics of every friendship, the unspoken hierarchies, the tiny cruelties, and spontaneous acts of care. Her mind maps everything, the beautiful and the unkind alike, until she realizes she's spent the whole time watching life instead of living it. She feels both older and smaller in that moment. Awareness can make you feel infinite and irrelevant at the same time. She starts to wonder whether perception has limits, whether there are things the heart isn't meant to see all at once. The universe, she thinks, might protect itself through opacity. Maybe that's why some things are hidden, not to deceive, but to preserve wonder. Full visibility, she realizes, is a kind of violence. It leaves nothing sacred. In that understanding, she begins to experiment with restraint. When she feels her mind reaching too far, interpreting, dissecting, controlling, she takes a breath and lets perception soften. She doesn't close her eyes, she just allows them to blur. The world shifts slightly out of focus, and in that gentle haze she feels relief. Not ignorance, but mercy. Perception, she learns, doesn't have to mean exposure. It can mean attention. True seeing isn't about collecting information. It's about witnessing presence. To perceive something without trying to own it or explain it, that is the beginning of wisdom. She starts to apply this to everything. When her family argues, she doesn't analyze motives. She listens for tone. When the day feels chaotic, she doesn't catalogue each problem. She feels the rhythm of motion instead. Her perception becomes less like a spotlight and more like sunlight, soft, diffused, revealing through warmth rather than scrutiny. In the matchmaker, or any similar moment, she notices how overanalysis ruins connection. When she predicts what others will say before they say it, she misses the surprise of their humanity. When she finishes their sentences in her mind, she closes the space where empathy might grow. She realizes that perception without patience becomes arrogance. The illusion that you already know someone when you've only seen their outline. She learns to slow down, to let others reveal themselves at their own pace, to let life speak in fragments rather than in full confession. Some truths, she finds, only emerge when you stop looking directly at them. They appear in reflection, in the corner of the eye, in silence, in pauses between words. There's a quiet evening when she sits on the roof, watching Elmore under fading light. The town is absurd, chaotic, unreal, yet, in its distortion, she sees a strange kind of perfection. Nothing is consistent, but everything belongs. She realizes that perhaps perception's purpose isn't to organize reality, but to witness its beauty even when it makes no sense. To perceive something deeply is not to define it, but to honor it by letting it exist freely. And she begins to see herself differently too. She used to think her mind separated her from others, that her clarity was a wall. But now she sees that perception can also be bridge. When guided by compassion instead of judgment, it becomes empathy. When guided by humility, it becomes reverence. The same eyes that dissected the world can now soften enough to love it. There's a profound quiet that comes with this shift, not emptiness, but balance. For the first time, she feels that she doesn't have to see everything to belong to it. The world is allowed to remain partly hidden, and that mystery doesn't threaten her anymore. It comforts her. Some things deserve to be unseen, so they can continue to live. Later that night, she looks in the mirror and sees her own reflection flickering in the dim light. For once, she doesn't analyze it. She doesn't search for meaning in her expression or the fatigue in her eyes. She simply looks, not to understand, but to recognize. The mirror doesn't need interpretation, it needs presence. That's when she understands the real weight of perception. It's not in seeing too much. It's in learning to hold what you see without needing to change it. To perceive the world and allow it to remain imperfect is an act of love. As she lies in bed, her mind quiet but awake, she feels that she's finally found balance, not through blindness, but through gentleness. Perception has stopped being a burden. It's become a prayer. To see, to know, and to still say yes. The last thought she has before sleep is not an analysis, but a feeling, soft, wordless, true. The world doesn't need to make sense. It only needs to be seen kindly. Silence, for Anais Watterson, used to feel like failure. It was the space where thoughts hadn't yet formed, an absence, a void. As a mind built on precision and movement, she feared what existed in stillness. Silence made her feel powerless, disconnected, incomplete. If she wasn't thinking, she wasn't existing. That's what she used to believe. But over time, as her awareness deepened and her perception softened, she began to sense something beneath the quiet, something not empty, but infinite. The silence between thoughts is where her mind finally starts to breathe. At first, it unsettles her. She's used to the hum of cognition, the constant rhythm of analysis spinning inside her head. She's used to knowing. But now, as she lets herself pause between ideas, she realizes that knowing has limits. Thought can only describe what already exists. Silence, though, silence holds potential. It's the birthplace of understanding that hasn't yet taken shape. It's not absence, it's promise. She starts to notice silence everywhere, in moments she used to overlook. The second before laughter begins, the inhale before someone speaks, the stillness of a room after her family finally falls asleep. Silence isn't the opposite of noise, she realizes. It's what gives noise its shape. Without silence, sound would have nowhere to land. Without pause, thought would have no meaning. The silence between thoughts becomes her teacher. It shows her that not everything worth knowing can be reached through reason. Sometimes truth arrives quietly, not as revelation, but as presence. The more she listens, the more she understands that her mind doesn't have to work so hard to find meaning. Meaning finds her if she's still enough to let it. In her family's chaos, she begins to practice stillness. While Gumball and Darwin argue, she watches. While Nicole rushes, she waits. While Richard dreams out loud, she listens. She doesn't withdraw. She participates through quiet. It's a different kind of communication. One that doesn't use words. One that exists beneath language. And she discovers that silence can carry affection. A quiet glance across the table. A shared moment of rest. The calm that comes when no one needs to explain themselves. Silence is not absence, it's understanding without speech. There's an afternoon where she sits under the shade of a tree behind the school, a book open but unread in her lap. The air hums with faint life, insects, wind, the distant chaos of Elmore. She closes her eyes and lets her mind settle. The silence that follows isn't static, it moves. It feels alive, almost breathing with her. For the first time, she senses her thoughts dissolve into something larger than herself, a field of awareness that holds her, like the world thinking quietly through her. She begins to see that the silence between thoughts isn't hers alone. It belongs to everything. It's the same silence that exists in nature, between the waves, between heartbeats, between stars. Existence, she realizes, depends on rhythm, presence, and pause, sound and stillness, thought and emptiness. Even the universe needs space between pulses to continue. This realization humbles her. Her brilliance once made her feel separate from the world, the only one awake among dreamers. Now she feels part of something vast and shared. Silence becomes her connection to the whole. It reminds her that beneath all the thinking, beneath all the stories and noise, everything returns to the same stillness. She notices how her relationship to thought begins to change. Her ideas become slower, softer, more intentional. She doesn't rush to fill every pause with explanation. Sometimes she lets her mind rest between observations, trusting that not every gap needs a bridge. In those pauses, she feels closer to truth than in all her analysis. It's as if wisdom lives not in the words, but in the spaces they leave behind. At dinner, she catches herself about to correct Gumball on something trivial. The thought rises, sharp and precise, then fades before it reaches her tongue. The silence that replaces it feels gentle. Nothing breaks. No one suffers. The world continues. She smiles faintly, realizing that silence, when chosen, is an act of kindness. Stillness begins to follow her into every part of life. She stops forcing answers. She stops chasing closure. Some questions, she learns, are meant to remain open, not because they're unsolvable, but because their beauty lies in the asking. The silence between thoughts is where those questions live peacefully. At night, when the noise of the day fades, she sits by her window and watches the dark breathe around her. The world seems quieter now, but not emptier. There's something sacred in this quiet, as if the universe is thinking without words. She realizes that her entire life has been a search for language to express what silence already knows. In that moment, she understands what peace really is. Not the absence of thought, but the gentle space that holds it. The silence between thoughts isn't something to reach, it's something to remember. It's where she began, before language, before logic, before self. It's the still pulse of being itself. She thinks of her family asleep, their breath forming small patterns in the night. Every inhale and exhale contains its own silence, a rhythm older than any idea. She feels connected to it, not as a concept, but as a presence. Thought fades, awareness remains. The silence between thoughts is the place where love and understanding become indistinguishable. When she finally lies down, her mind feels like the surface of a still pond, reflecting, not reacting. There are no conclusions tonight, no lessons to capture, just stillness, vast and patient. The kind of quiet that doesn't end when sound begins again, but flows beneath it forever. And before she drifts to sleep, one final thought flickers and dissolves, leaving only silence. Maybe peace isn't found in thinking less, maybe it's found in listening deeper. Meaning, for Anais Watterson, has always been her anchor, the invisible thread tying chaos to coherence. She builds her life around it. Every idea must point to something. Every event must reveal a lesson. It's how she survives the absurdity of Elmore. Meaning is her map, her compass, her quiet rebellion against the disorder that defines her world. But as she grows, as her awareness deepens, she starts to sense that meaning isn't a fixed structure. It shifts, it slips, it dissolves as quickly as it forms. And that realization, more than anything, shakes her. It begins subtly. A thought she's certain of one day feels hollow the next. Lessons learned in one moment unravel in another. The truths she builds don't collapse dramatically, they fade softly, like chalk in rain. It isn't that they were wrong, it's that they were temporary. And that's when she begins to understand the fragility of meaning. For a mind like Anais's, built on pattern and structure, this fragility feels like grief. If meaning can't last, then what holds the world together? What keeps love from being just chemistry, laughter from being just noise, life from being just motion? She searches for permanence in concepts, for stability in philosophy, but every time she looks closely, permanence turns to vapor. The more she defines meaning, the more it escapes her grasp. She starts to see how meaning behaves like light, visible only in relation to what it touches. It doesn't exist on its own. It depends on context, on perception, on moment. The meaning of anything, a word, a memory, a feeling, changes depending on where you stand. That truth should unsettle her, but slowly it begins to soothe her. Because if meaning can change, then maybe it's never lost. Maybe it just transforms. She remembers a childhood moment, drawing on the walls with crayon, getting scolded, feeling the sting of guilt. At the time, it meant rebellion. Now, looking back, it means something else entirely: expression, curiosity, the need to leave a mark. Same event, different meaning. The past itself, she realizes, isn't stable. it's rewritten every time we remember it. That realization expands until it touches everything. Every argument, every success, every loss, all reshaped by time and love and memory. Meaning isn't fixed, it's fluid. It grows with you. The truths of childhood give way to the truths of awareness, and those two will dissolve into something gentler one day. Meaning isn't the destination, it's the trail you leave behind as you move through life. For someone who has spent her life chasing answers, this discovery feels liberating and terrifying in equal measure. She begins to understand that nothing, not even understanding itself, is permanent. The point of learning was never to arrive, it was to keep unfolding. And maybe that's what makes life precious. If meaning could be permanent, it would stop moving. It would stop living. She looks at her family and realizes how much their world depends on this fragility. Gumball's wild plans, Darwin's heart, Nicole's perseverance, Richard's simplicity, none of it would survive under constant analysis. Their love thrives precisely because it doesn't demand stability. It renews itself each day, careless of logic, fearless of collapse. Maybe that's what meaning really is. Not something built to last, but something constantly remade through living. Anais begins to find beauty in impermanence. A joke that disappears into laughter. A thought that fades before it's finished. A moment of affection that exists only once. They don't lose meaning when they end. Their ending is their meaning. Ephemerality is not weakness, it's proof of life. There's an evening where she watches the sunset from her window. The light is delicate, dissolving into layers of gold and violet. She knows that in a few minutes it will be gone. But instead of sadness, she feels gratitude. The beauty of the moment exists precisely because it ends, meaning she thinks is not about lasting forever. It's about being fully present before it disappears. She starts to notice this everywhere, in conversation, in thought, in silence. Meaning flickers like a heartbeat. You don't hold it, you feel it. It doesn't live in permanence, but in attention. To live meaningfully isn't to find something eternal, it's to keep rediscovering wonder in the transient. Anais's mind, so accustomed to preservation, finally begins to trust the temporary. She stops hoarding insights like treasures, stops fearing that what she learns will fade. She realizes that every truth serves its moment. Understanding doesn't need to survive to be valuable. Wisdom is not permanence, it's adaptability. Her awareness deepens again, but now it feels softer. She looks at her own thoughts the way she looks at clouds. Solid for a second, dissolving the next, always changing shape, always becoming something else. She realizes that even the idea of self might be this way, not a constant identity, but a series of reflections passing through time. Meaning, she sees now, is not an answer. It's an atmosphere. It surrounds everything. It's the invisible quality that turns experience into connection. When she listens to her family laugh, that's meaning. When she forgives without needing an apology, that's meaning. When she watches a thought dissolve and feels peace instead of panic, that's meaning too. And yet, there's tenderness in knowing it won't last, because the very fragility of meaning makes it sacred. If it were eternal, it would stop mattering. If love never faded, we'd never learn to cherish it. If moments never ended, we'd never recognize them. The fleetingness of life doesn't diminish its value, it defines it. Late one night, as she lies awake, Anais feels a strange stillness, not from exhaustion, but from acceptance. The world, she realizes, doesn't need to make permanent sense. Its meanings can flicker and vanish like sparks, and that's enough. Every insight she's ever had, every thought she's ever chased, was just one flame in a long chain of transformation. She closes her eyes and imagines all her ideas floating away, equations, philosophies, analyses, dissolving into the air. She doesn't feel loss, she feels lightness. Meaning doesn't disappear, it returns to the world. It waits quietly to be found again by whoever needs it next. And as sleep approaches, she understands something she never could before. The goal of life was never to capture meaning, but to let it move through you, to feel it, release it, and trust that it will come back in another form. Meaning isn't fragile because it fades, it's fragile because it lives. And in that fragility, she finally feels at peace. Logic was Anais Watterson's first language, the one thing she could always trust. It was clean, precise, obedient to reason. When the world around her spun with noise, logic gave her ground. It made her feel safe. Every cause had an effect. Every question had an answer. Every thought could be traced back to something measurable. That was the comfort of it. Logic was the one realm where chaos couldn't reach her. But as she grew, as she saw her family stumble, love, and laugh their way through a world that refused to obey any formula, she began to notice something strange. The moments that mattered most never fit inside logic. They existed just beyond its edge. A hug that made no rational sense. A joke that shouldn't have been funny. A failure that somehow led to connection. Logic could describe them, but it couldn't contain them. The light that lived inside those moments came from somewhere logic couldn't reach. For a long time, that frightened her. If logic couldn't explain everything, what could she trust? What was left to hold on to? But over time, the fear softened into curiosity. She began to wonder whether logic was never meant to capture the world, only to point toward it. Maybe reason was the finger, not the moon. Maybe understanding was not the end of thought, but the beginning of wonder. She started noticing the light that lived beyond logic. It wasn't literal. It was a kind of quiet radiance that appeared when she stopped trying to analyze everything. It glowed in the simplest things. Her family's laughter echoing down the hall, the rhythm of rain against glass, the way time slows when she watches someone she loves simply exist. That light wasn't knowledge. It wasn't emotion. It was something in between. The awareness that life is beautiful, not because it makes sense, but because it doesn't need to. Anais begins to see logic not as a prison, but as a bridge. It takes you as far as it can, then asks you to leap, to trust, that something beyond calculation will catch you. That leap, that willingness to move past certainty, is where wisdom begins. Logic brings clarity, light brings meaning. The two are not enemies. They complete each other. She experiments with this idea in small ways. When Gumball explains something absurd with complete conviction, she doesn't correct him. She listens. She follows his strange reasoning to its emotional core, and there she finds truth, not factual, but human. Logic tells her that his ideas are impossible. Light tells her that his imagination is a kind of courage. Both are right. She starts to see that logic and feeling are not opposites, but two sides of perception. Logic gives her the shape of the world. Emotion gives it colour. Without both, everything goes flat. The light beyond logic isn't irrationality, it's integration. It's the place where the mind stops dividing and starts belonging. There's a day when she watches her father try and fail to fix something simple. A small household object broken beyond repair. He insists he can do it, smiling the whole time. Anais could easily take over, fix it in seconds. But she doesn't. She watches him try, watches the joy in the attempt, the way his optimism lights up the room. It hits her that logic would have solved the problem, but it would have erased the meaning. Some things don't need fixing. Some things only need to be witnessed. That's the light again, the wisdom that lives in imperfection. She thinks about how her whole life has been an attempt to define the world through precision. But what if precision was never the goal? What if clarity isn't a single point, but a widening horizon, one that keeps expanding until it becomes mystery again? Logic gives you the tools to reach the edge, but only wonder can carry you past it. Anais begins to realize that intelligence without wonder is a closed system, a mind orbiting itself. But when logic bows to light, when understanding turns to awe, the orbit breaks open. Knowledge stops being about control and becomes a form of reverence. To know something deeply, you must also accept what you can't know. At night, she sits at her desk with a lamp glowing softly over her books. Equations, notes, theories, all the symbols of order lie before her. But instead of working, she just looks at the light itself, the way it spills over the paper, fading at the edges. It reminds her of thought, bright at the center, dissolving into mystery the further it spreads. For the first time, she feels no need to chase the darkness away. The darkness isn't ignorance anymore, it's potential. She begins to understand that the world is not divided between logic and chaos, but united by the tension between them. Life is not meant to be solved, only seen, fully, kindly, without resistance. The light beyond logic isn't a rejection of reason. It's its evolution. It's what happens when understanding turns into gratitude. And she feels that gratitude growing in her, for her family, for the absurdity of existence, for the endless contradictions that make everything real. She doesn't need every answer anymore. The questions themselves glow with a quiet beauty. Logic built the path that brought her here. Love lights the rest of the way. She looks out her window at the stars and feels the scale of everything, infinite, unknowable, radiant. She knows that each star burns with reason, with science, with physics. But the feeling they give her transcends all of that. Their light is truth expressed as wonder. It's the same light she feels inside when she understands something too big to explain. Anais closes her eyes and sees that light everywhere, in every absurd moment, every broken rule, every act of care. Logic helped her find her place in the world. The light beyond it helps her forgive it. When she opens her eyes, she smiles softly. The world hasn't changed. She has. She no longer needs it to make sense. She only needs it to shine. Wisdom, Anais Watterson comes to realize, was never hiding in the farthest corner of thought. It wasn't waiting in the pages of her books or the equations she once worshipped. It was in something far simpler, something she'd been surrounded by all along, being itself. The quiet pulse of life beneath thought, beneath logic, beneath the endless movement of the mind. Wisdom, she finds, isn't about knowing more. It's about knowing when to stop searching. She feels this first in her body, in the stillness that used to frighten her. She notices how breath moves without instruction, how the heart beats without reason. The mind can describe these things, but it doesn't make them happen. Life does. Being does. For so long, she thought consciousness was the top of the hierarchy, the final frontier of understanding. Now she sees it differently. The mind is just one wave in the ocean of being beautiful, necessary, but not separate. She begins to see her thoughts not as burdens, but as movements of life itself. They rise, they fall, they fade. None of them define her. None of them last. She spent so much of her life building identity around intelligence, around control, around awareness, but being has no need for definition. It doesn't ask for proof. It doesn't need validation. It simply is. And in that simplicity, she feels peace deeper than anything her logic ever gave her. There's a morning when she wakes before everyone else. The house is silent, except for the slow rhythm of the refrigerator and the soft hum of light through the curtains. She sits at the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular. Her mind drifts, but not toward analysis, just observation. The dust floating in the sunbeam, the warmth of the table beneath her hand, the faint smell of cereal. She isn't thinking. She isn't doing. She's simply being. In that stillness, she understands something profound. Wisdom doesn't begin with understanding the world. It begins with belonging to it. All her life, she tried to interpret existence from a distance, as though she were studying it. But now she sees that there was never a line between her and the world. The observer and the observed are one. Every thought, every feeling, every mistake, it's all part of the same movement. She doesn't need to earn her place in reality. She is reality. Her family wakes slowly. She hears their footsteps, their laughter, the soft chaos of morning returning. The noise no longer feels like an interruption. It feels like music. The same mess that once overwhelmed her now feels sacred. It's the song of being, and she's part of it, not as conductor, not as critic, but as note. The meaning of life, she realizes, is not something you discover, it's something you join. She watches Gumball spill something, Richard forget something, Nicole sigh in exasperation, Darwin try to make it better, and she smiles. The absurdity is perfect. For the first time, she doesn't feel older than them, or separate from them. She feels equal, connected, whole. Her intelligence doesn't isolate her anymore, it integrates her. Awareness, when softened by love, becomes unity. As the day unfolds, Anais moves through it with a lightness that surprises her. She still thinks, still analyzes, but her thoughts feel less like control and more like play. She no longer demands that the world make sense. She trusts that its nonsense has meaning beyond her comprehension. Wisdom, she finds, isn't the end of confusion, it's the comfort within it. There's a moment that afternoon when she steps outside. The air is gentle, the sky wide and moving. She watches the trees sway and realizes that even chaos has rhythm. The world doesn't need to be fixed to be beautiful. It only needs to be witnessed with presence. She remembers how, once, she believed that understanding was the highest form of existence. But now, standing in the wind, she understands that existing is the highest form of understanding. She starts to feel how everything she's learned, every layer of intellect, every philosophy, every truth, has led her back to something elemental. Awareness, knowledge, control, perception, silence, meaning. All of them were just steps toward this, the quiet recognition that life doesn't have to prove itself. The wisdom of being is accepting that everything, even confusion, even loss, belongs. That night, the family gathers to watch a movie. Nothing profound, nothing important, just noise, laughter, warmth. Anais leans against her brother's shoulder. The screen flickers light across their faces. For once, she isn't observing or interpreting. She's simply feeling the pulse of life move through her. Every detail, from the crunch of popcorn to the rhythm of laughter, feels sacred because it's unrepeatable. She realizes that wisdom isn't about escaping the absurdity of existence. It's about finding tenderness within it. It's about loving what's fleeting, forgiving what's broken, and being grateful even when nothing makes sense. The mind seeks answers, But the heart finds beauty, and beauty, she sees now, is another word for truth, a truth that can't be spoken, only felt. Later, in bed, she thinks about everything she's learned, how awareness turned to compassion, how control gave way to surrender, how silence became her teacher, and how love illuminated everything logic couldn't. All of it led her here, to this final stillness, to this acceptance that wisdom isn't accumulation, it's release. Her last thought before sleep isn't a thought at all. It's a feeling, vast, quiet, complete. She no longer needs to reach beyond herself to understand the world. She is the world understanding itself, softly, for a brief and beautiful moment. The wisdom of being is knowing that nothing lasts and loving it anyway. And as she closes her eyes, Anais doesn't drift away from thought, she drifts deeper into existence, carried by the same rhythm that moves everything. Awareness hums, time slows, the world breathes, and for the first time, she doesn't need to understand it. She just belongs to it,